Hello and welcome to the Aspects of Training lesson, which is part of the Fitness and Training module for flipped learning in GCSE Physical Education. In a previous video, we looked at the principles of fitness training and how that applied to our fitness training over a period of time. What we're now going to look at is a specific training session, and we need to understand that every effective training session should have four main phases. These phases are the warm-up, the fitness phase, skill development, and our cool down. And in order for us to be very successful, we need to make sure we plan for these four phases. Over the next few slides, we're going to look at each phase in detail. As we should know by now, warm-ups should be an essential part of our build-up to any physical activity. And what a warm-up does is it prepares the body physically and mentally for the activity ahead. When we look at the body in terms of it being physically, what we need to do is we need to warm our muscles up, because cold muscles do not adapt very well to exercise and they're more prone to injury. So we need to get our blood pumping, more blood around our body. The blood contains oxygen. The oxygen goes to the working muscles and it warms up our muscles. They become more flexible and they become a lot better under the physical demands of exercise. So that's really important for us to do that. What it also does, it also prevents injury of those soft tissues. And when we talk about soft tissue injury, we're talking about mainly muscle injury. And by warming ourselves up, we have less chance of injuring those muscles. So the second part of that was also mentally. I think a warm-up actually trains the mind and it focuses the mind on the activity ahead. Whether you are doing some skill-related movements, or whether you're running, whether you're stretching, it lets you get your mind focused on the activity ahead, and really puts you, what some people say, in the zone, and really ready to compete. So that's really what the warm-up does and what we're hoping for it to achieve. When we're looking at examination answers, we need to make sure we don't just give the primary school answer. And I keep saying to you, the primary school answer is we do a warm-up so we don't get injured. Well, some injuries we can't avoid. Impact injuries, things like that, accidental falls, slips. We can't, just because we've warmed up, doesn't mean to say we're not going to be injured. But we need to be very specific and put our science hats on, give our scientific definition of why we need to warm up. So talking about the heart, the blood, the oxygen, the muscles, the flexibility, and it prevents those soft tissue injuries that we've talked about there. All right, let's look at how we do warm up then. The first problem we sometimes get is that people who are not experienced tend to stretch first. And that's really problematic. And just think for a second, if I've talked to you about cold muscles and the danger that they have under physical demands, then think about what's the problem of stretching first. Alright, you've probably got it there. We're not warm. So what we need to do is we need to do a pulse raiser. And what a pulse raiser is a light jog or some exercise that gets our pulse beating faster than normal. It gets our heart then beating, it gets the blood pumping around the body, and we start to warm ourselves up. Then, and only then, can we then go into our stretches, and we can do a series of either static or dynamic stretches where we can actually warm those muscles up, we can make them more flexible and ready for the activity ahead. What we'd also probably like to do is to do some specific movements. And going back to our principles of fitness, talking about being specific, we need to make sure our warm-up is specific for the activity that we're going to do. I think that's very important when we're planning a warm-up, that all warm-ups shouldn't be the same, they should be specific for the activity ahead. Okay, so in the fitness phase, what we need to do is concentrate on the specific area of fitness that we want to improve within the session. That might be speed, it could be stamina, it could be power. Any one of those components of fitness we would specifically look at. And also in this, it's worth noting that we would now look at employing the principle of overload. And what this means here is we would look at making sure we had the correct intensity to ensure progression. So it isn't too easy and it isn't too hard. We get that correct level of intensity in the workout with the fitness to make sure that we're progressing and it's worthwhile. The next phase of the session looks at specifically skill and the development of skill within our sport. This is probably more important for team games, where we would look at either individual skills or maybe some tactics or phases of play or things where we're actually working as a team. But even in different sports and even in athletic events, It's not just about the fitness. There's always some things, whether it's the start of 100 metres, or whether it's pacing, or whether it's sprint finish, or there's always some technique somewhere within every sport that we need to do. And it's important that in the skill development time, we look at these specifically and put these skills to the test and develop them so we're going to be as highly skilled as possible, so that we can carry them out as effectively as possible and as successfully as possible in our sport. The cool down is a very important phase of our session, but it's sometimes the phase that's forgotten by a lot of people. And the cool down is the start of our recovery process, and this is very, very important as athletes. When we're working hard, if we don't have enough oxygen to actually supply our muscles, we use lactic acid as a substitute. And what happens is our body goes into what we call an oxygen debt, where we don't have enough oxygen to go around our body. So instead of our body shutting down, our body creates lactic acid, and we then supply our muscles with lactic acid, which works instead of oxygen. The problem with lactic acid is that it builds up in our muscles and causes pain. And at the end of the session, if we don't replenish our body with oxygen and stretch and get oxygen going back around our body, then the lactic acid will stay in our muscles and it will cause aches and pains the next day. And I'm sure you'll have all experienced that at some point when you've been working hard before. If you haven't done a proper cool down, you wake up the next morning, you feel aching, you feel stiff, and your muscles don't feel very good. So the way we do a cool down is we will do some light exercise along with some stretching, taking some deep breaths, and really getting that oxygen into our body and around our system, and then the lactic acid will start to leave our body through our natural waste products. Now we understand all the 4 phases of our effective training session, we need to go back and look at the correct level of intensity so we can employ the overload principle to make sure that we're actually progressing. The way we do this is we need to look at our maximum heart rate, and a very simple equation to work this out is 220 minus your age. So if you're 15, we look at 220 minus 15, giving us a maximum heart rate of 205. Once we've got that figure, we then need to look at 2 different types of training thresholds. And a training threshold is a range that we need to be working in to make sure that we are progressing, because that's the correct level of intensity. So that's very specific there when we're thinking about our overload. So the first one is our anaerobic threshold, and this is if we want to work on our anaerobic fitness. So as we know, anaerobic is without oxygen, short, sharp bursts, great for sprinters, throwers, jumpers, things like that. And if we want to work on our anaerobic fitness, we need to be working between 80 and 90% of our maximum heart rate. Likewise, if we want to work on our aerobic fitness, we know that this is a lower level intensity because we're working for longer periods of time with oxygen, and our aerobic training threshold is between 60 and 80% of our maximum heart rate. Now with modern technology now, and heart rate monitors, GPS trackers, all the sort of kit we've got available now in our sports teams and with sports science, we can very easily track our heart rate, and we can make sure that we can monitor that all our players, all our athletes are working at this specific correct level of intensity, depending on whether we want to work them on their aerobic or their anaerobic thresholds. Now that we've understood that, you should be in a great position to be able to plan and deliver your own training sessions for various different sports, making sure they're specific and making sure that they are at the correct level of intensity to ensure progression.